So let's go over the purposes of team development. So the broad purpose is to integrate goals of the individual and the group with goals of the organization. So that's a pretty packed sentence. So what are the goals of the individual, and how can we set up a structure to where the goals of the individual are actually the goals of the group? So when we think about that, remember when we first started talking about teams, one of the integral parts of the definition of a team was that there was mutual accountability and there was interdependence between the tasks. So when creating a team, it's important to recognize that individuals have goals. They have their own motivations for doing their work, their own basically pride or uh, external rewards that they get for doing good work, but they also have their own career goals, their own personal goals. So it's not really going to be reasonable to try to make sure that every single individual goal is included with the goals of the group. But the more that the group's successes become also the individual successes, the more likely the goals of that individual will become cohesive or integrated with the goals of the group. Now, we also need to make sure that the goals of the group are still in line with the goals of the organization. So, and again, this is kind of a quick check to make sure that the group itself hasn't become kind of a toxic group, or if a political group that's more worried about the successes or how it's perceived to be successful by the organization than actually creating good output or attaining goals which are in line with the goals of the organization. So this is a pretty big three-step process. How do we integrate the goals of the individual with the goals of the group, and that those goals of the group are the goals of the organization as a whole? So kind of a way to break this apart is to identify objectives and set priorities. So what are the objectives of the group, and how do those objectives align with that of the organization? And then how do we make sure that those objectives are something that is naturally going to tend towards increasing the chance of people becoming cohesively involved in the interdependent process of attaining those goals? Also, then, how do we actually examine and team performance? So, what are the benchmarks for high performance, adequate performance, low performance, and how is that communicated not only to the team but to the individuals on the team? And we can analyze the group process. So, how does the group actually work together? So, what is the process within the group? How do we improve communication? And often, communication is one of the big ones that we find that when there is a problem with the process of a group, it often is either in how the group makes decisions or how the group communicates to each other. Improving problem-solving ability is back to that decision-making generally, increasing cooperation, working more effectively with other teams, so how does the team actually interact with other teams, and finally the increased respect of the other team members within the team. So all of these are kind of the broad goals that we can look at, and like for example, increasing respect of other team members. A part of individual goals is social goals and esteem goals. So how well do you enjoy working with others? How do you feel others think of you and respect you on the team? And we can look at that too as a process of team development. Generally speaking, when we're actually trying to do an intervention in an existing team, it's going to run into two types of broad activities. Family group diagnostic meetings aimed at identifying group problems, and family group team building meetings aimed at improving team function. So basically, are we actually having to do a diagnostic? What's wrong with this team? In other words, we know it's underperforming or it's having problems. Now we need to identify why. Or are we going into a team that's functioning decently? There's no big diagnostic problem at the moment, but it could definitely improve function. It could be doing even better. So are we building a team up further, or are we doing a diagnostic of a problem? So generally, team development meetings has two objectives: task or work agenda of the group, and process by which members work on that task. So we're mainly focused on, if we're looking at team development and we're looking at how to actually figure out what's going on, we're generally wanting to look at how the actual agenda is set by the group, what's being done, and then the process by which those members work on the task. And we're going to go into some specific examples of kind of 5 to 6 steps we can take to do this process of team development. So the general process of team development, the first one is initiate a team development meeting. So basically identifying what actually is the problem. Are we doing a diagnostic? Are we doing a development? What are we trying to focus on? Then we're going to try to set the objectives. So this often may be the entire team involved. This may be an external consultant meeting with a few members from the team. So step 1 and step 2 are generally about actually kind of defining the problem either within the team itself or with a small group that's going to be working with the team. So what is the broad purpose of this intervention? Is it being functioned more on diagnostic and looking for problems, or is it more about just developing the skills that are already there? Then, number 2, setting the objectives. So what are the objectives of this intervention? What are we trying to attain? Step 3 is going to be actually collecting data from the actual team. So looking at what's going on, this could also be observational. And then generally, we're going to actually then plan a meeting with the entire team. So there's going to be a team meeting, which is going to be a part of that training, which is going to discuss this. So we're bringing the team in. The team itself is going to become an active part of this process. Step 5 will be conducting the meeting. And again, this could be being self-generated by a small group of leaders within the team. It could also be an external consultant coming in. And at this point, that's when the discussion is going to happen with the team itself. Here's the objectives that we have. Here's why we're doing this training. Here's the data we have that suggests this is needed. And now let's talk about it as a team about how we actually can address this problem and achieve these objectives. So what are your ideas? So again, we're going to use the strength of a team, bringing diverse opinions, open communication, and collaborative decision making into the process of helping the team become even better. It's basically a structured way of having a team change the goal for a day or a goal for this particular meeting, not to being the goal of the actual purpose of the team, but the goal now is making the team better. And then step 6 is always going to be evaluating the team development process. So did the actual intervention work? Does there need to be more work done? Do we see an improvement by what this process has occurred or achieved? And that's really what we're going to focus on. And then asking, do we need to do more? A specific type that you'll often see as far as team development is an outdoor experiential laboratory training experience. Takes people who work together and places them in an outdoor setting with specific exercises. This could be an outdoor setting. This can also be at a conference center. The main thing is to break up. You don't want to be doing this where the team normally works. There needs to be a different setting, whether that's a conference room at a hotel, whether that's a lunch meeting at a local restaurant, whether that's an outdoor camp. The basic thing is you're wanting to change the environment the team functions in. And this is an important component of this, because what we're really trying to do is on multiple levels, make the team work together like they work together on tasks within the organization in a brand new setting, which is going to help break a lot of those norms and roles, and on something that they normally don't work on, which is going to make them able to maybe step back a little bit from being so set in their ways on how the organization achieves things. Because if you give them a novel task, that's going to be a task they don't have a lot of personal experience with. It's going to really highlight the positives and the negatives of how the team works together, compared to a team that has been working in an organization for years and years and has all of that information of how things are supposed to be done or the way things have always been done. So this hastens discussions surrounding leadership styles, norms, and teamwork. After the exercise, the team's going to discuss what they learned and how to apply it to their work. And like I said, these are often, and again, I'm guilty of this myself. I actually was required to once go out. We went out to a state park, and we had to do these 3 activities that involved, one was a scavenger hunt, another one was a multi-part crafting project, and I remember myself even thinking, this is kind of a waste of my time. Why am I having to do this when it has very little to do with my actual work? But what it did allow, and what I could see as it actually was occurring, and as we discussed this afterwards, is it really broke apart a lot of those norms and kind of standard patterns that my group had fallen into, and it let us look at how would we function on a brand new novel task. Because that kind of a, not necessarily stressful situation, but novel situation really will highlight the strengths and the weaknesses of how the team does its process, how it decides how to do something, and then how it breaks up work when we're not following kind of a standardized script of what we've always been doing. So the outdoor lab process, assessment of the team prior to training. So usually the process of working through an outdoor lab process, again, either internally if the team has the skills within that team to actually do organizational development, or maybe an outside consultant will come in. and assess the team and kind of try to determine what are the main lessons we're hoping to teach with the outdoor lab process. So what are we wanting to make them a little bit more aware of? What are things that are occurring in their communication, in their process, and in their decision making that they may now be blind to because they're so used to the process? Then we're going to have an orientation meeting held with the participants to kind of not necessarily tell them what we're wanting them to learn, but to give them an idea and to kind of sell them that, this really is going to have some value and that a lot of people come in skeptical but realize what this kind of a process shows. We then want to make sure that the exercises we're doing are selected to fit the abilities of our team. So we want to make sure that it's things that they're going to be capable of doing, but we also want to make sure that it's not necessarily just mimicking what they're already doing, because that's going to allow them to fall back into those norms of behavior. The team is then going to participate in the exercises, and then it's important to have the team after each exercise or after the lab itself really reflect on the process. What has this taught them? What are things that they were surprised about in how they function on these novel tasks? And then generally, we're going to follow this up with a team meeting where the team is now focused on a new goal. And that goal is, how do we incorporate what we learned in the lab process into our actual work plans? Another type of team development we can do is role analysis. It's basically designed to clarify the roles of members. Role ambiguity, team members are not necessarily knowing what others expect. And that's something we really have to look for, is that because teams tend to be fairly fluid and ideally sharing responsibilities, sharing accountability, and sharing decision making, that also means that sometimes the roles that that occupy in teams are a little more ambiguous than they would be in a non-team kind of organizational setting. So recognizing that role ambiguity can be a problem, a role analysis can kind of make people a little bit more aware of what their roles are. Role conflict occurs when there's differences between the expectations of individual team members and their actual behavior or what's actually happening in the team. So for example, if you think that your role is one of leadership, but it seems like everyone else tends to take over the meetings, that's going to cause role conflict. If you think your primary task of the team is to focus on a particular skill or task, and you're rarely asked to actually use that task or do that task or use that skill, again, that's going to be role conflict. So role analysis is used to clarify role discrepancies. So basically, it's to have the team itself discuss what roles each person plays to determine if the perceptions of each individual's role is in basically cohesion or similar to the role expectations that other people on the team have, and then how can we actually clarify and remove these discrepancies or conflicts and reduce as much as possible the ambiguity within the team. So steps in role analysis: the role incumbents describe role as they see it. So generally, this is kind of one of those exercises where you're going to start with a big old pad of white paper at the front or a computer screen that you can quickly type in. And each person is going to basically describe their role. And again, it often helps if there's an OD specialist that can kind of give some parameters and help some understanding. But once that person gives their role, others may add or modify to it. In other words, so the first person, the incumbent, describes the role as they see it, then the other members will basically agree or disagree in a kind of developmental way. Then the role incumbent, expectations of others. So basically, we're going to be doing this. So for each person, there's going to be a sheet of paper or a screen that includes their own perceptions of their role, and then what other people think of their role. So that's the adding and multiplying or modifying. So we're going to end up with, if we have 7 people, 7 sheets, each one is going to have what the incumbent thinks their role is, and then what everyone else in the team thinks their role is, or expectations of that role. So we're going to do this for each person in the group. Role incumbent then makes a summary, and each member completes the above steps. Role profiles are then periodically reviewed. So this is basically allowing the team itself to define its own roles and to openly communicate about the expectations each person has of that person on the team. Role negotiation is directed at work relationships among team members. Members discuss what they want from each other and why. So this is just another kind of form. We can, from role analysis, which is really just descriptive or diagnostic, role negotiation is now actually having a team focus on, what do you think your role should be? What would make the most sense? How do we actually set up roles in a way that actually help the team function better? Steps in role negotiation. Generally, we're looking at contract setting issue diagnosis, role negotiation, and then actual written agreement. So, excuse me, contract setting and issue diagnosis is basically determining what is actually written already. So, what actually are the expectations or the kind of mandate of this particular team? Are there organizationally mandated roles within the team? Particular titles, particular job requirements of individuals. Then, is there any particular issues with those roles? And finally, an open negotiation of what should each person's role be, resulting in, again, removing role ambiguity, actual written agreements between each person, recognizing what their roles and expectations are in this particular team.